Thank you. I appreciate you all being here. I really, really do. Y'all look freaking gorgeous. Not as gorgeous as me, but still, we're holding this house down. You lovely people. You look absolutely adorable and cute. Anyways, welcome. Let me make sure the girls are being shown. I know what you really came here for, but welcome to the Jessie Gender Variety Hour, the show where the jokes are lame, the costumes are 90% Star Trek cosplay, and the audience is behind a screen, so we don't have to throw out the turfs. I mean, hecklers. Same thing. I mean, turfs, hecklers, we all know that they're basically the same thing. But today, I want to bring it all down to a more kind of toned down note, a more applicable level, if you'll indulge me. Today, we're going to have a big discussion about performance, namely, the performance of gender. I know, I'm really getting outside my wheelhouse here. But most of us are aware of the differences between sex, your physical characteristics at birth, and gender, which is a social construct. And the social construct that is gender gets incredibly complicated because we are told to perform a certain gender based on our perceived sex at birth, which is perceived by physical characteristics and, let's be honest, mostly what kind of junk you're packing down there. However, we're told to perform an idealized version of that gender, one that we can never really live up to because no one can live up to that idealized form, that human Adonis or, the womanhood god. I was hoping it would come to me, but it didn't. The fear, you get where I'm going with it. Anyways, we're actually human. We're not this idealized format. We're idiosyncratic, we're contradictory, we're messy, we're a combination of all different traits, personalities, and features. Some of us don't like the gender that we're told to be and wish to transition to be seen as another one like many trans people do. Yet all of us, trans or not, which by the way, we call non-transgender people cisgender people, just as a term, just an academic term. But regardless, we all build our performance of gender out of certain social characteristics, from clothing to makeup to other aspects. It can also be defined by physical characteristics which we have little to no control over outside of things like surgery and massive lifestyle changes. And gender can be defined by others' perceptions of us rather than our own. Take, for example, how comedian Tig Notaro often discusses how she is perceived as a man despite identifying as a cis woman her entire life.
Right when we were passing each other, he said to me, he said, them little titties. I thought you was a man.
It's because gender, in many ways, is a performance that is often viewed, judged, and criticized just as much as any play or movie performance. The gender we're told to play can be a performance we love to put on, as it is for cisgender folks, or one that we feel forced to drag ourselves on stage every night to play for, as it is for many transgender people, especially if we're forced to do the one that we were assigned at birth. Or it can be a performance that we like to play, but others think is something else, like for many non-binary or gender-conforming trans and cis people who may perform a certain gender a certain way, but folks read as a binary or other gender that they are performing. They don't get their performance. Or some folks wish to say, fuck that, I don't wish to perform at all, as many agender folks do. But they still feel judged to be a gender when they go out in public nonetheless, as if they're putting on some sort of avant-garde performance with no regard for their feelings on the matter. Gender is often defined by the perception of our performance, and how it measures up to some idealized play that all of us have in our head that society tries to form for us, as well as how that performance is interpreted by others. Yet, because we live in a society that so intensely genders us, gender is also how we often think about ourselves, how we define ourselves within our own brain and against others, and in how we externally view ourselves from within in the world. While gender is social and judged by those around us, we can't help but internalize for ourselves what our idealized self is, what we want to be, and interpret that through the lens of gender, because that's the lens that we've been given. We may wish to be a certain way, and for many of us, we filter that sense of being of who we want to be through gender, through things like femininity and masculinity, these binary concepts that the world has given to us. For me, for example, I like to be certain things. I like to have certain traits and personality types and get interested in certain things. And for me, I like to think of the ways that I enjoy those things and how I interact with the world in those ways is as a girl. But that is just a definition, an idea that I put into my brain, or society put into my brain, and I interpret it through, based upon characteristics, both physical and social, that I wish to put out into the world through this prism, and exist within, even within the confines of my own home and mind. And as so often the case, I feel like talking about a transgender perspective on an issue can often elucidate the nature of something, like the performance of gender, in a way that is less clear in a cisgender experience, even though I think transgender experiences like my own are often quite relatable to anyone, cis or trans. I feel like a transgender experience may have its own unique quirks and foibles, but I often feel that many of us, whether you're trans or not, feel the exact same thing, just expressed in different ways, and maybe in different elements of your life, whether it be through gender or through other things. So, let's talk about the performance of gender, and talk about it in the sense of something else, how it relates to sexiness. When you're a kid, performing gender doesn't really enter into your mind. We're constantly absorbing the world as we're learning it, rather than breaking it down into what we're either subconsciously or forthrightly told are for boys and for girls. When we're really young, the biggest conscious influence is how our parents dress us from time to time, at least when it comes to gender. For me, I didn't really feel a distinctive pull towards performing any which way as a kid. My parents were fairly open like that. I mean, I liked both things that were considered girly and boy-y. I mean, I still like playing with my Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog toys, which, by the way, if anyone remembers that show, I love you, because Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog was the shit. Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog. I mean, think of like Power Rangers, but fantasy. It was fucking fantastic. But it's also what you would think of as a stereotypical boy thing to like. But I also, at the same time, had an adorable mermaid doll that I loved to death and would comb her hair for hours while she just watched the Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog kick butt. And then also, sometimes, kicked their butt whenever she felt like it because, I didn't see it that way. I didn't see a separation between these two worlds, the ones that the mermaids were supposed to inhabit and the one that the Mystic Knights were supposed to inhabit. You see, when I was really young, these things weren't seen as separate to me. A mermaid existed in the same world as the Mystic Knights, and there didn't seem to be a need to separate her from that world arbitrarily in my mind. But eventually, that started to change, and the little subconscious pick-aparts of gender expectations became stronger. Around preschool to elementary school, I started to be old enough to realize that the world saw me as different from the girls in my age group. Even though just a few years before we were all sort of lumped together, I started to feel this out of placeness whenever I was with the girls. At least I was kind of aware of the separation that I was supposed to feel when I was with them. I'm sure many of us feel that way for at least a little while we're younger, but it's hard for me to describe because it wasn't something obvious. I just had the sense that I wasn't being perceived correctly by those around me because I wanted to be with the girls, but I wasn't supposed to be, and yet it was still seen as a little bit okay at that time. But I still felt that as I looked at the girls, I felt like that matched me more, but no one else around me seemed to agree. My mother started to buy me more and more of the Mystic Knights toys for my birthday and for Christmas, but the mermaid she got me never really got any of her friends to hang out with. Never really got to hang out with any of her kind. Not that, again, that she couldn't hang out with the Mystic Knights. They were all buddies, but I started to understand that they were in two separate worlds. A subtle reinforcement of this dynamic. Soon, the mermaid was left in the toy box, not because I didn't want to play with her, but because I started to realize that, for some reason, I shouldn't. That to play with her was wrong. And yet I wanted to, I liked her, And as I looked at the girls around me, I felt that I wanted to be with them, as I said, to hang out with them. But I was seen as an outsider more and more each day. And so I was thrown in with the boys. And while there were certain parts of that world that I liked and was encouraged to show, like my love of sci-fi and video games, other parts started to fall off. Like a performance. Like I had to pretend to be that. Masculinity, while not the complete opposite of me, because masculine and feminine are not diametrically opposing forces, still felt like it didn't fit me right. It's kind of like a shirt that you put on and others say you look damn great in, but makes you personally feel itchy and uncomfortable, and you know it doesn't really highlight your best features. I was aware of how masculinity was expected of me and how I was scrutinized in my performance of it, and so I felt like I had to wear that t-shirt and pretend it fit perfectly, always trying to ignore that itchy feeling and yet never able to scratch it, lest I be seen scratching it and someone knowing that I didn't fit it right. I did not want anyone to know that. The older I grew, the more femininity felt inaccessible to me. In fact, as puberty started to come, my body seemed to betray me, to feel distinctly less and less feminine. Hair started to grow in places I didn't want it to, my shoulders broadened, my voice deepened. I hated every second of it. It felt like I was being forced to wear the garb for a performance that didn't match the script that I was expecting I was going to get. And yet the costume kept becoming a part of my body. And everyone told me I looked great in it, but it felt like a song and dance number, something I was putting on, and felt like kind of a mimicry, a mockery of myself. Hell, not even myself, not even reflective of myself. But everyone seemed to think I was playing it pretty damn well. I was forced into a role I didn't want to be cast in. And yet, apparently I played it pretty well. But as a result, I stopped caring for my body. If my body was betraying me, if it was casting me in this role, wasn't what I wanted it to be, what was the point of taking care of this fleshy prison that I was sentenced to? I ate terribly unhealthy foods, didn't exercise, didn't wash my hair really at all, and didn't do any skincare, didn't brush my teeth. I just didn't give a crap. I mean, at my heaviest, I weighed 350 pounds and I was very out of shape. And this is common for trans folks. A study found that 72% of trans people were classified as out of shape compared to 66% of cisgender folks. And while the classifications of what we consider to be out of shape in this culture warrant a whole separate discussion, for me, I was out of shape. I was deeply unhealthy, and it was a direct result of my discomfort and depression. I didn't want to respect my body because, frankly, it didn't respect me. And to be clear, I hope this doesn't come across as fat-phobic. I think people can be any body shape they want, and health is not defined by how thin you are. But I know for me, and for many trans people who I've met, my and our body shape and size at the time before we come out was an outgrowth of us, of me, not caring. It's just a costume I put on. A costume I didn't like, and so I was unhealthy within that body, both literally, physically, and mentally when thinking about it, and how I considered it. And so, on the one hand, I felt ostracized internally for my own sense of femininity, yet externally, I was being taught a different relationship to femininity. Because I was seen as a boy, I was beginning to be told by society that femininity was other, different, strange, and wily, something different from myself, exotic. Everything from cinema to advertisement to just how we speak and discuss women and discuss femininity in society today begins to frame womanhood and femininity as different. But even further, society considers it to be something that is performed, something that is put on. You wear makeup, you wear dresses and, put on all this glitz and glamour. Even things that are uncontrollable, like how big a girl's breasts are, it's all seen as intentional. It's all seen as part of the costume that girls put on for the benefit of boys. Why do you think we as a culture say stupid things like she wanted it, or how many girls begin to be sexualized as soon as their breasts start to grow? Because femininity is seen as an invitation, as something made for others rather than existing for its own purpose, for the people who wish to express it for themselves. Femininity is seen as a performance for men's benefit, for others' benefit. And men are seen as the default, seen as just normal and natural. This isn't a costume, this is just humanity. Assigned female at birth folks feel this idea of the performance of their own identity from a very young age in their own way. How they're constantly are taught to be aware of male attention, how their bodies are seen as inherently consumable rather than for their own benefit. It's something gross and disgusting for any young girl or assigned female at birth person to be taught, and many cisgender women have discussed how this affected their childhoods, as well as many transgender men and non-binary folks who were assigned female at birth. Yet, as someone myself who was seen as a boy on the outside from a young age, assigned male at birth, I was told that femininity was something put upon for my benefit. A performance done for me. And this creates an interesting dynamic in the mind of a young trans woman person like myself. Because internally, we feel our own growing desire to be seen as feminine because that's who we are, and yet simultaneously being told externally that femininity is inherently a performance to be put upon to be desired. And this starts to lead to questions that, especially at a young age, but even as an adult, you can't really articulate, but you start to feel and ruminate on. If I want to be feminine, but femininity is a performance, is it a performance I could be a part of? And if so, was my femininity something that I wanted for myself, or because I want to be desired by others? I feel like femininity is something that I want for me, and yet femininity is supposed to be for others. How do I reconcile that? It's confusing, and you start to question your own relationship to your own internal struggle. You had these feelings that you already couldn't articulate, that you were a girl because you felt that way, but maybe you're a girl because you want to be desired by others? That doesn't seem right. That doesn't feel right. But that's what I'm being told. But it doesn't matter. My body certainly wasn't feminine, yet there was one way I felt I could access femininity, at least at that time as a kid: clothing. Like the clothing that I had been made to wear before I understood the difference of gender, while trying to understand the difference of my gender in comparison to the outside world, I could gravitate to clothing with a purpose and choice now. And so I started to steal my mother's clothing. Steal it from her closet or from her little dresser drawers that she had in her room. My mother has a bunch of clothes, and she wouldn't miss one or two things going missing, and I would wear them in hiding whenever she wasn't home and stash them under my bed. Clothing became a way for me to see myself in a way I couldn't show anywhere else. Whenever my parents would go out for a nice dinner or just be out for the day, I would put on her clothing, put on a dress, and just look at myself in a mirror every once in a while. I wouldn't get turned on by it, but I would just start to think this was at least something that felt like me. It looked better on me than anything else, even if it didn't really fit me very well. It was 10 sizes too big and didn't really fit my features. But there was something in it. There was something in it that even the most tailored of men's clothing didn't seem to articulate. I mean, I looked attractive, especially at that age when you're going through puberty. You see, sexiness is often described as being attractive to others, what others will look at you for. But when your sense of self is only shown in isolation, the only person that gets to judge your attractiveness is you. My sexiness was only for my own benefit at the time, not anyone else's. I wouldn't really consider it sexiness or attractiveness, but that's the way that my brain could articulate it at that time, because that was all I kind of knew. I knew I was a horny teenager, and I also knew I was a girl, and I also knew that femininity was a performance, all these things mixing together, and it was like, oh, I'm attractive, I'm sexy. But really, all I wanted was to be seen, to show my performance, the performance of me, the real me, to others because this performance felt easy to me. It felt comfortable, not like a performance at all. Yet, the few times in my life I even got to passingly perform femininity for others, it was considered a joke. Back when I was in preschool, I would have to go to daycare after school, and in that daycare I bet the girls that I could play tag, and if I got caught, I would be forced to wear a dress. Forced. And you can bet I would constantly lose the game on purpose. And so I would be forced to put on a dress in the bathroom. And in those few moments in the bathroom where I was putting it on by myself, I would revel in wearing that dress. Even at that young age, I felt it. But then, I would step out of the bathroom in front of my peers in the daycare. And instead of recognition of who I was, at least that feeling that I felt in the bathroom, all I would feel instead was the laughter of all my friends. How funny it was that I was wearing a dress. That contentment that I had when publicized for others was humorous. A joke. Years later, in high school, I was cast in our school's rendition of Bye Bye Birdie, a musical play, and I got to be the main character's mother. Yeah, I had to actually hide my excitement at being cast as that character because I was like, you're gonna have to pull my leg, I guess I'll play her. Because I didn't want them to know how much I really, really wanted to play a girl, even if it was a grandmother, on stage in front of other people. It was a chance to be myself in front of a crowd of people, even if it was a literal performance. And it was so much fun. I got to be a woman on stage. Yes, for jokes, yes, for laughs, but I got to do it. And those rehearsals were so much fun. Because after a point in rehearsals, people were laughing the first few days, but then it just became a normal part of our rehearsal process. And I was making jokes and being strange on stage, but my friends and peers didn't mind me just wearing a dress because that was just the normal part of the rehearsal process. It made me feel so good. And the night of the show, it felt so good to get all that makeup on. And I killed that part. I was even nominated for a Best Supporting Actor award in the comedy category in my regional area. But it was still a comedic role. Me, someone seen as a boy, playing a feminine grandmother, was a role played for laughs. This thing that felt so personal and meaningful and private became a farce when done in front of the biggest crowd of people that I ever got to show that side of myself to. My only access to femininity, to myself, was seen as a big joke. Yet, while clothing was the only access to femininity that I had, when I looked at the girls in my school, they didn't seem to need clothing to access femininity. I remember working at a Boy Scout camp every summer since I was 12 years old. And while working there, we all had to wear the exact same uniform. You know, khaki shorts, button-up uniform, or a t-shirt. And there were these two girls who worked up at the camp, and they had to wear the same exact uniform as everyone else. And yet, all the boys in the camp would always talk about how hot they were. Again, this assumption that the girls were there for their benefit. But also, it's interesting for me when I noticed that they were considered hot even though they were in the same exact clothing that I was wearing. And I wasn't like them. So my one access to femininity, clothing, they didn't need. They got to be seen as girls. My performance was terrible, comedic. I guess I was a bad actor, at least when it came to being a girl. And so, as I went off to college, I decided that if my true self was only seen as a comedy, then I guess I would rather perform a drama. Be seen seriously, at least by the people around me. I would rather be the very model of a modern major general. I mean, scientist Solarian. I mean, masculine man. You get the idea. I would rather be a very masculine man. I would be a boy and like it, damn it. I would be confident, strong, badass. That is also very common for many trans women. because we feel like we can't be the women that we are, we instead try to double down on masculine roles. It's this dynamic that is partially why you see a huge percentage of trans women in the military, for example, a traditionally very masculine defined position. It's this desire to try to double down on performing something that you feel that you never really were able to live up to because society tells you that you need to be that thing, that you need to be a man. And so if you feel like you've been failing at the performance, you might as well try and double down. Buckle up, buckaroo. Let's do this thing. Yet, I believed that I sucked at this performance too. I was too unathletic, too emotional, too kind. Because I felt like I was bad at this performance, I was unconfident. Unmanly. I should give myself some credit. I remember one night I was hanging out with several girls that I knew in college, and they all started commenting how sexy I looked and was. Now, this was a normal college thing at that time. We all were fairly open about sex, and we would all kind of talk openly about it, but I never really believed them, that they actually thought I was sexy, because they all tried to make me feel sexy by telling me how masculine I was, how much of a guy they saw me as. And so I just thought that they saw the performance. And I thought that performance was bad, so maybe they were just trying to be kind. But I asked, actually, recently about that very conversation. A friend of mine was actually there, and I asked, and they said that, yeah, no, they thought I was sexy. So I guess the performance was good. But moving beyond that, the interesting thing was my sexiness at that time was also never seen as for the pleasure of anyone else. Yes, these girls, or at least the people that were seen as girls in that conversation, all considered me a man and all thought I was sexy, but I never really felt like I couldn't control or stop that conversation, or that I wasn't a part of that conversation. I never felt like my agency was being taken away in that situation. They all commented about my personality, my intelligence, my ability to choose things. That was part of my sexiness. I was perceived as a man, and my sexiness was my own to control. I never at any time thought that when someone else told me that I looked good, that I wasn't able to control that situation. Yet, internally, I thought they were all lying to me because I was lying. I believed that my performance was bad too, so how could they ever truly like such an awful performance? That would be like someone earnestly enjoying Tommy Wiseau in the room.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Like, sure, I like watching The Room and I like watching Tommy Wiseau, but I never really liked him earnestly. So, in a way, to me, my masculinity was Tommy Wiseau. Okay, maybe not that bad. Yet, I never saw myself that way. The only time I ever felt remotely sexy was when I was myself wearing the clothing that I wanted to wear. A dress, or a girl's shirt, or a skirt, or whatever. Yet in college, because I was living in a dorm room with other people, I didn't really get to do that much, or really, honestly, at all. I had brought some of my mother's clothing with me and had it stuffed away, hidden from my roommates, but I never wore it because I never really had a chance to be on my own. My audience of one that actually got to see myself had now dwindled to none, because I couldn't even do it for myself. No one got to see me anymore, not even myself. And if an actor acts in the woods and if a tree falls on him, will anyone give a damn if they make a sound? This body didn't belong to me, but a stranger who was performing a role, and that stranger wasn't a bad person. He was actually a very good person. But he wasn't me. I didn't care for him all that much. It's just like a character in a TV show that you're like, he's fine. I get why other people like this guy. I think he's cool, but I don't really get him. I began to feel this frustration at not getting to express my own femininity. No, not my femininity. A frustration at not getting to express myself, which was coded as feminine, for me, at least at the time. I always had to express this stranger, be him, and never got to be me. I never even got to access me, even in the ways that had been available to me before, clothing, like I said. And it became more and more frustrating. I would drive down to clothing stores near my college by myself. just pay myself to just go into the women's clothing section, grab a dress, and change in the change room. Because at least there, no one would see me, and no one knew I was there. It doesn't really matter. The only person that would see me would be the changing room clerk. And who cares? It's not like I'm going to see them again, really. But instead, I would just wander around the edges of the women's clothing section. Angry. And then go back up to my dorm room and cry in the shower where no one could hear me. And soon, I began to ideate suicide. And so at that time, it became a really clear choice. Either I come out, or I stop existing altogether. It's not like I existed much as it was. Why not take the next step? When people talk about being trans, being a choice, they think that being trans is a choice. But the only choice that I made in this entire situation was this one. To choose to live as me, or choose to not live at all. That was the choice because the performance was too tiring. It took too much, and I had to hide too much. Seems like a weird transition, but at the same time, as all this was going on for me, everyone around me was getting all the sex. It was college. People were getting laid. It happens there, I'm told. But I didn't get laid once during college. I know, this is a weird transition, but I promise you, we're heading somewhere. I didn't get laid a single time. And not because I didn't think I could. I probably could have. But I just didn't feel it. I didn't want to have sex because my body and how I felt was unsexy. Unworthy, actually, of having sex. I felt grossed out by the performance that I would have to give with my body in order to have sex with others. But I was also a college kid. I wanted sex because everyone around me was talking about it, about how cool it was, and everyone was fucking everywhere, apparently. My friends wouldn't be believed. But I couldn't imagine having it the way I was. The one and only time I've had penetrative sex with a girl in my entire life when I had a penis, nothing happened on my end, if you catch my drift. And not because she wasn't pretty, but because I hated the whole thing. The image of myself having sex was just there in my brain. I'm like, gross, I don't like this. It became this frustration, this anger that I couldn't be sexy. I couldn't be the way that I wanted to be, even for a moment. And I couldn't enjoy what I was supposed to be doing at that time. What everyone was doing, guys, girls, NB pals. When you're that young, and because society places so much value on it, sex seems like it's an important factor in your life and that you need it to define yourself. It's a formative part of your life. It's not really true. People don't need sex. I see you asexual people. But, especially at that time in college, to think that you'll never be able to have it, especially when you're not an asexual person like I'm not, to think you'll never have sex because your own body isn't your own, it's hard because of how much value the world places on it. And by the way, this is not a trans-exclusive feeling by any means, but it is one that comes out in a specific way for trans people. At least it did for me. At the same time, I also started to meet and become close friends with more girls and folks who were assigned girl at birth in college, which was much less of a stringent sex-segregated place, both systematically and socially, than it was in high school. And so, I was going through all of this stuff, and this is where I really started to learn and empathize with what it meant to be seen as consumable by men. I began to learn and listen to the stories, the true stories behind what for me was growing up was just an uncomfortableness. I won't share their stories, but I learned of the harassment and abuse that some of my friends faced because they were seen as objects for use by men. Their femininity not for their own selves, but for others. Seen that way from the very moment that they started to develop any sense of what was perceived to be feminine. It was horrifying. Yet I also saw them and others at the same time enjoying having sex and being able to go out to bars and clubs and being sexy for themselves and others, something that I could never really be a part of. Again, this confusion. Constant confusion about the nature of performance and my desire to perform for myself, for others, for me. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. All I knew is the performance that I wanted to play I didn't get to be a part of. And so, that choice that I was talking about, I finally made it. And by the very fact that I'm still here, I think you can tell which choice I made. In college, I finally came out to two incredibly close friends. I made that choice, and for the first time in my life, I felt wonderful because my audience of one that had dwindled to none suddenly became three. Myself and the two of them. And it wasn't a comedy, it was me. That was me. It was amazing. And they were so supportive and wonderful, and I mean, I didn't know how to perform that well. I didn't know how to dress myself or put on makeup well. I was very untrained in the wardrobe department, but this performance felt great. Perfect, actually. For the first time, they convinced me to go out in public. With others, with them. And I didn't feel like a joke. They just treated me with respect and made sure that everyone else did too. We made sure to go to places where my other friends and family couldn't see, like a movie theater, but I got to be me. I had an audience that loved me. I mean, I remember the first time we went to go and see Frozen in movie theaters while I was wearing a dress for the first time in public, at least being myself and not for some sort of like comedy. And it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life at that time. Also, seeing Elsa being a queer anthem at that time was also kind of perfect. And while there's a lot of ups and downs in that story, the next big beat that's important for what we're talking about here is, because of that, I finally came out to friends and family, and it was so joyous. And I decided that I wanted to have that feeling all the time. And so I began to transition. But there was still this feeling that I didn't deserve to feel this way. You see, my performance of womanhood had only been with the few people who I knew accepted me and saw me. But I hadn't really gone out into the world all that much, lived a life every day that way. You see, there'd always been this thing that I knew happened to women, going back to when I was a kid. That their femininity was seen as consumable by men, as seen as for others. But I was doing this for me. But I had seen through my female friends how much they had suffered for that perception, how much their bodies and lives were taken advantage of. And as you can see, during this time, I didn't really know exactly how to present as a woman. It was kind of more the stereotype of woman because I was trying to figure out what it meant for me, and so I only went with the most heightened versions of what I knew to be. I didn't go out in princess costumes. This is just to illustrate the point in this video, but I don't know. I went over the top with it because that's all I knew. And I learned to cater and adjust and mess with it over time. But I'll be talking about that later in another video. But it was part of this experience, this time of my life as I started to transition. But my femininity, such as it was at that time, I knew wasn't meant to be consumable by men. At least that's how it was told. Trans women were gross, nasty. What right did I have to take on femininity when I had never had to suffer the pain of it? How could I claim femininity when I couldn't also understand the pain that came with it? Certainly I knew suffering and pain, but that wasn't here. I never had to feel the harassment, the objectification that I knew came with being seen as a woman in the world. That I had seen boys that I had grown up with participate in and seen the ramifications of on my friends who were seen as girls. What right did I have to claim being a woman if I never felt that sense of having my femininity not being for me? I know that's all nonsense BS, but you feel it. You don't want to claim something that you have no right to, but I also knew that it was the thing that made me feel good. How do you reconcile that? The thing that TERFs yell all the time. Trans women don't understand what it means to be a woman. They've never suffered this way. That's their whole argument, or at least a big chunk of it. But I felt it, and certainly I pushed back against that, but I know early in my transition I felt it. So what changed? You see, one night, one of those friends who I'd come out to found me crying outside of my apartment. And I explained all this to them. And I said, you just have to be you. You have suffered by not being you. And you would suffer more if you didn't be you. You would just be playing a role you hated to play until you decided you didn't want to play any role ever again. But we like seeing you play the role you were born to play, the real you. And you shouldn't have to suffer more just because of some other people have yet to treat you as shitty. Because they won't appreciate your performance. And besides, believe me, they will eventually treat you shitty as you transition anyways, both for being seen as trans and for being a woman. And they'll choose which one they wish to see you as it suits them. But for right now, don't worry about that. All you have to worry about is, do you take the risk to go on stage and perform your dream role, to accept it when it's being offered to you, and be damned the critics. Because you know that you love it. All you owe yourself is to be you in a way that makes you actually feel happy and worth being alive for. Hearing that, it was the first time I really felt myself as a woman, that it wasn't a performance, but that it was just me existing. I felt content because I was going to be able to be on stage. I was going to be able to dance on stage. And it was going to be me, and it was going to be goddamn beautiful. You see, the performance was not just the beginning, but it was the beginning that I had been waiting for. But soon, it was time to talk about the audience. You see, we've been talking about myself and a lot of the feelings I had about what that performance meant to me, but there were some who would see this performance and just call it that, a performance, without recognizing that all of us, every single one of us, is putting on a performance of our own gender every single day, whether we're trans or not. And my performance of my manhood was just as much a performance as my womanhood. But this one, the womanhood, that one felt true. That made my heart sing. But sure, I was going to stumble and there would need to be a lot of rehearsals in order to get to the grand performance, the actual performance of me. But I would get there. I would find the best version of myself. Not even the best version, just me, and who that variations of me could be, and still call me me. And that person is the person you see in front of you now, albeit one with a little bit of a performative flair going on right now. But it is me. And how I settled on this performance is something I still want to talk about. But that's going to come in the next video. Because for our next Variety Hour, I want to talk to you a little bit beyond just the performance of gender, to really get to the heart of what it means to perform for an audience. And whether you want to perform for an audience at all. I want to talk about what it means to be sexy. That's for next time. Until then, thank you for watching. Thank you so much for my patience. I absolutely love you and adore you. Thank you for helping me pay my bills. Thank you for helping me do this job. I could not do this without you, and I adore you so much. And an extra special thank you to Morgan the Pirate Creek, Joe Herman Holt, Louise Howard, Eliza Tantavi, Miranda Janelle, Catherine Lambeth, Ashley Allen, Bo Kiki Yost, Stephen Kleinard, Jem Shin, Ish the Mad, Mary Mello, Matt Chung, Keith Feemster, Randy Thompson, Wellington Marcus, Boyden, Mary Beth, Earl, Vincent Ellington, D. Casaray, Chloe Dollar, G-Man 42, Joseph Dewey, Felicia Toast, Sylvester Rouchout, Natalie Fortune, James Cribda, Alex Miller, Teresa Elizabeth Christensen, Barbara Ruski, Dominic Noble, A Man Chooses, A Slave Obeys, Jennifer Russ, Someone Librarian, Jessica Wright, Sunk Corgi, Sonia Rowe Perdeau, Nathaniel Fraughton, Peter Lander, Jared Johnson, Frangato, Celestial Dawn, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Geek Filter, Mountain Harpy, Jose Alfredo Villalobos, The Otha Boyd, Pissed and Twisted Garage, Ulysses the Pagan, Melinda Walters, Meadow Whisper, W. Randy E.D., John Weatherby, Stephen Richardson, Kevin Freite, Alex Owen, All the Tribbles Sing, Beatrix Purvis, Bass, Lisa, Casual Observer, Maggie the Goblin, Tiffany Danger, Cause I've Got Faith of the Heart, Odd Just Odd, Flynn, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Lamia, Jessica Chapman, Gretchen Badger, William Stewart, Sarah Lamoureux, Eva Kaniva, Sarah Bystam, Jacob Tovar, Melody Ann Winters Good, Noble Monster Comics, Laura Demereau, Jess Johnson, Kay Liss, Sky Sinner, Nathan Steele, Jason Knott, Sean Piper, Fit7, Spooky Heather, Sylvia, Hierissus Blue, Maeve, Troy Stull, Andrew K, Strawberry Pup Tart, Crit Fax, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Polly Mina, Angie Pugh, Munir Amlani, Michael Godey, Jenny Marble, Pasty, Elijah M, Ver, Andy H, Corey and Vale, Honkin' In. Love you all. You're the best. Mwah. Thank you for being beautiful.